Mazda has always been a brand to keep one foot firmly placed in the emotive side of driving, so no matter what marketing suit is hanging around, you always feel like there's an engineer in a lab coat hanging just over their shoulder to help keep things in check, and that's what makes the likes of the Mazda 3 hatchback such a great go-to model for those that are seeking a bit more fun. So with the Mazda 3, we're talking nothing but 2-litre naturally aspirated petrol engines, no downsized turbos in sight, a drive that's aimed at those that actually like driving, and some of the best concept-like styling money can buy. I mean, look at it. It probably still look nice in brown. So why should you go for something like a Mazda 3 over the likes of a Volkswagen Golf or a Ford Focus? Well, let's take a look. Now, I can understand why when people first see a picture of the Mazda 3's interior, they'll think it just looks a bit dark and a bit bland. But I think once you jump behind the wheel, you'll realise just how driver orientated it is and how it just, well, it just makes sense. There's not too many buttons and there's not a really steep learning curve when it comes to understanding what all the controls do. And build quality overall is just spot on. It's soft where it needs to be, it's rugged where it needs to be. I mean, even the dials and the buttons just feel upmarket. And of course, let's not forget about the driving position. I mean, Mazda's pretty renowned for it, and the Mazda 3 doesn't disappoint. It almost feels like the cabin's built around it when you're sat behind the wheel. Now, standard SEL Mazda 3s offer a list of impressive kit with sat-nav, DAB radio, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, a colour head-up display and adaptive cruise all thrown in. This snugly mounted 8.8-inch infotainment system comes as standard as well, but it's not touchscreen. It's actually controlled via a dial down here, a rotary dial, which it does take a bit of getting used to, especially if you're just used to touchscreen. But once you're out on the road and you realise that you can just drive and not take your eyes off the road, you can just navigate this wheel here, I think you'll really come to love it. I actually like the fact that you get part digital displays behind the steering wheel. They're not fully digital, they're not fully analog, they're somewhere in between, and I think it just suits the car's personality really well, especially when it comes to having a physical rev counter. Just a random note actually, the heated seats in here are, I think, hands down the hottest heated seats I've ever used. Toasty bum. Aside from that, storage in here is spot on. You've got two good sized cup holders here, a bit of storage near the cup holders. You've got loads of underarm storage as well, although it's a bit of a weird sliding mechanism for that. And the door bins are half decent as well. And you get a nice big glove box. Now, this is where the Mazda 3's exterior sleekness comes back to bite it a bit, because getting into the rear, you've almost got to climb through like this as opposed to just step in. And once you're back here, I mean, it's okay for me, the short guy. I've just about got enough headroom, leg room's okay, but for someone over 6 foot, you are going to struggle. And moving about back here is a bit awkward as well, because you've got this big hump in the floor. Now, although these windows are quite small and they make the back a bit dark and dingy, I actually really like how they sit. I mean, it's really relaxing to just sit like this. You get a very, very clear view out, and the sill's actually quite low as well. Another thing I really like is that you get that same attention to detail you get in the cabin back here. I mean, the finishing on these doors is spot on. The boot's a bit of a funny one as well, because initially the only thing you're going to notice is the fact that there's a narrow opening and a bit of a drop when it comes to this load lip. But I think once you start loading a few things in and pushing them right into the corners, you'll realise that there's actually a really usable amount of space on offer, 350 litres in fact. The seats also fold down nice and flat, although again, it's not without faff. The mechanism is a bit fiddly and you have got to go and physically do it yourself. There's no quick release button here. So yeah, statistically, pretty good. Practically, a bit impractical, to be honest. As I alluded to earlier, the Mazda 3's engine range is pretty limited. They're all 2-litre, naturally aspirated petrol engines with either 122 or 186 horsepower. And that's because Mazda does things a bit differently. Instead of just downsizing old engines and whacking a turbocharger on them, it finds other ways of making its larger engines more efficient, with the likes of cylinder deactivation technology and the addition of compression controlled spark ignitions. I don't know what they are either, but apparently they are supposed to make the likes of this 186 horsepower 2-litre eSkyActiv X petrol have the characteristics of a diesel, with the likes of low down torque and impressive efficiency. And the figures speak for themselves really. I mean, this petrol that we've got is a mild hybrid engine, and it claims to return a combined 55 miles per gallon. And I'd say that's pretty accurate, especially if you clock up a decent amount of motorway miles. And if you're a company car driver, you're looking at a 27% BAK tax rating for 2021 and 2022. But enough about all that, let's slip on the engineering lab coat and talk about what makes the Mazda 3 such a delight on the road. Well, first off, there's this best-in-class 6-speed manual gearbox. I mean, they don't make gearboxes like this anymore. It's just absolutely spot on. It's so clunky and mechanical, and there's such a short throw. It demands you to get physical with it in all the best ways possible. It's just absolutely spot on. There is actually a automatic option available. Shame on you if you're going for that though, because you're just missing out. You're like going to a gig and wearing earphones. Now, if you're not used to driver's cars, then you might find the steering of the Mazda 3 a bit disconcerting at first, because, well, there's a bit of weight and a bit of meat to it. It's quite quick to come alive just off centre. There's a bit of added urgency at a 3/4 turn, and after a turn it is pretty quick to re-centre. But I like all these things about it. I mean, it just gives an added bit of urgency that you don't get in many family cars, or any car for that matter. Some might find the ride a bit lumpy and firm at first as well. I did actually, but once you spend a bit of time in it, you'll realise that when you hit any significant bumps, the ride actually irons them out pretty well. It's quite a good compromise, and of course, a stiffer ride adds a bit of extra finesse when going into corners. And alongside its well compromised ride, insulation in the cabin's pretty good as well. Of course, there's no avoiding that this is a 2-litre naturally aspirated petrol, and it will require a bit of work to get any semblance of performance out of it. There's no bubble of power at 2,000 or 3,000 RPM. You're gonna have to rev it all the way to 6,000 RPM to get some proper pull from it. But some people, including myself, don't mind that. I mean, I quite like the hard to get nature of the naturally aspirated engines. I mean, you know, there's no turbo, but you can still have a lot of fun with this engine, especially when mated to this gearbox. And you know what? It actually sounds more like a diesel than a petrol. If you bounce the revs, it does sound a bit throaty. Too many manufacturers nowadays are too concerned with conforming to mediocrity, either for efficiency purposes or, well, why try and be the next Coke when you can just produce a bog standard tonic water for a comfortable slice of the market? Bit of a weird analogy, but the point is, Mazda does do things a bit differently, and although the Mazda 3 isn't perfect, I mean, its practicality is stuck somewhere back in 2010, it does offer something a little bit different for those looking to break the mold. Don't get me wrong, the Mazda 3 doesn't reinvent the wheel or do anything dramatically surprising. It's just what it offers is pretty rare nowadays. It's as rare as rocking horse poo. Sorry, just conscious of finishing the review on the word poo. Done it again. Bye.